Welcome to the third edition of Local and Uncommon. I'm your host, Robert Vingi. We're continuing the theme that we started in our first episode with early Kiawah Island history. Our first conversation was with Frank Brumley and Mark Permar, two gentlemen who have had an outsized impact on Kiawah. And now we're with another who has had an equally important influence on our island, Buddy Darby. Buddy, you're something of a legend in South Carolina and Charleston. You and your family have been leaders in our community for generations. And you've served in a lot of leadership roles. I know you've recently been board of MUSC's Children's Hospital, the Symphony. You were chair of the board at the College of Charleston for many years. But you're probably best known as the longtime CEO of Kiawah Partners, which led the development of Kiawah over 25 critical years. The influence that you and your partners had on Kiawah is indelible and continues today, even some 10 years after you sold your interest to pursue other opportunities. Tell me, Buddy, when did you first hear the words Kiawah Island?
Well, first of all, Robert, thank you. Thank you for doing this. The first time I ever heard the words Kiawah, I was in high school, 1971, I believe, and it was the height of smuggling in the Lowcountry, and there were bales of marijuana that washed up on Kiawah, and it was all over the press, and some of the enterprising seniors managed to get a bale, I guess, and when they showed up to school in Porsches, I was when everybody kind of knew and heard the word Kiawah, and those guys obviously got reprimanded.
That wouldn't be so good today. So you and your family has a history with islands in the Lowcountry. I mean, your grandfather purchased Isle of Palms, right?
Yeah, my grandfather, J.C. Long, he purchased in 1945 all the undeveloped land on Isle of Palms. So my whole life was really geared to that end of the world. And I didn't really know a whole lot about Kiawah, really up until the time that, we went and tried to put it under contract.
So that was 1988, I believe.
Correct.
So that's when you led the group that purchased Kiawah from the Kuwaiti development group. I mean, that's got to be a fascinating story, how that all came to pass.
Well, I mean, back then there were two papers a day, and I was working at the beach company with my uncle, Charlie Way, and was sitting at a conference room table with my cousin, Leonard Long, and Charlie came in and plopped down the Evening Post and said, look at this, and it said John Rivers has dropped contract to buy Kiawah Island, and we didn't know Kiawah Island was under contract. And Leonard looked at me and said, this is something that I think, this is a deal of a lifetime, maybe several lifetimes. So my job was to walk down the hall and try and convince Charlie, who had been a minority partner along with my dad at Wild Dunes. We had sold in 84, and I don't think he had the most pleasant experience, but it was, very lucrative. So once Charlie got on board, we had to convince my grandmother, and it was a very small meeting. And they asked me, well, what did I think? I said, well, I think this is a great opportunity. Only two things could prevent us from being a success. And that would be a natural disaster or economic disaster, both of which we had by about 1991.
So within a few years, both of those things came to pass. The Hurricane Hugo and the financial, I guess, the savings and loan crisis.
Correct.
Yeah. So y'all had this interior meeting. But it's got to be so much more to that. Y'all. It's one thing to agree to pursue it, but then to actually execute on that.
Well, we were lucky that the first general manager, Frank Brumley, who you had on the last podcast, and his partner, Pat McKinney, we were able to team up with them. Leonard was a very good real estate lawyer and did a lot of work for the beach company. And then Hank Holliday, who had worked for Bank of America back in the day. And so we began to assemble a really good team. I was by far the youngest. And I was...
How old were you then?
I was about 30 and a half, I think.
Oh my goodness.
And, it was a lot of, we were learning as we went, and as most people that grew up here, the War of Northern Aggression, all of our money got burned. So there was no money around. So we had to go pound the streets up in New York trying to find money. This is long before Hugh McCall made Charlotte a money center. So we did that. We knew that our business plan was to really take Kiawah from a small regional resort to an international resort. And we needed a new hotel, and we canvassed everything. We interviewed, the Four Seasons, the Ritz-Carltons, the Hyatts. We paraded everyone over and around Kiawah, and came up with Landmark Land, which was a company that was an S&L. And they had owned La Quinta, Palm Beach Polo, Carmel Valley Ranch, and they were probably the best purveyors of golf in the country. They had like 20 some odd PGA events, and they also had the Skins game, which was at PGA West at the time.
So you put this group together. This purchase price, I've got from my notes $105 million. Is that correct?
Correct.
And how did that number come about? And how did you guys come up with $105 million? And a follow-up question: did everybody think you were crazy? I mean, back then that's probably the biggest transaction.
Well, I think at the time it was the biggest real estate transaction in the state, and it was John Rivers had it under contract for 100, and when my Uncle Charlie went in to negotiate with Sal Alzamon, he gives us a call and says they want us to take 10 condominiums and windswept, and it was going to be an additional $5 million. So that's how we got to the 105 from the 100 that John Rivers had it under contract for. It was a lot of money, and I think we all felt that we knew how to execute. We just needed to get the right financing. And after, going to just about everybody that we knew, Hugh McCall came down, and he sent a team, Buddy Kemp at the time, and a woman by the name of Linda Woodside and Carlos Evans. They were part of the team, and they came in, and everybody was at a point in their career. Carlos had been at Hilton Head and knew the market well there. And Hugh McCall was trying to grow his bank, and he knew that this would be a good feather in his cap if everything worked well. So at the 11th hour, he gave us a commitment, and we ended up closing with then NCNB, and they were our banker for 28 years. Linda Woodside was our relationship manager, and we had a great relationship. And I sort of grew up from NCNB to Nations Bank to Bank of America, and that original loan got modified maybe 28 times.
Oh my goodness!
Yeah.
That's great. And Linda and Carlos are still in the Charleston area.
Yes.
So that's amazing. I didn't know that. So I'm just guessing. Well, okay. So first of all, you mentioned the seller. Pretty big transition going from a foreign owner to not only a American enterprise, but a local, a Charleston-led owner. Did that the significance of that hit you guys at the time, or how did everybody feel about that change of control?
Well, I'd been often at college during the whole rezoning, so I sort of missed the the whole foreigners coming on local soil. But I do know this. I don't know what prompted me, but right after we closed, which was June 29th of '88, between then and July 4th, I had erected a American flag right at the front gate, which is still there today. And I think it was then that I realized that, that having local ownership, and of course we were big on the community, and so having that affiliation, I think, was something that the residents in particular really liked.
Yeah, I love that. I didn't know that. Did y'all put that flagpole up, and so the first big, I guess, development effort you took on Kiawah was at not the preserve, it was
Osprey Beach.
Osprey Beach.
So Osprey Beach was all the sand that came out of Canvasback Pond went to Osprey Beach when you could do that.
Okay.
And so, wanting the low-hanging fruit, we needed to pay down debt. And so we did a transaction with Landmark in March 31st of 1989, and sold to them for $35 million the pad for the ocean course, the current hotel with hotel site where the sanctuary is, and all of the golf the public golf that existed at that time. And then the next thing was to go and try and continue to pay down the debt with selling the front beach at Osprey Beach. So we put those on the market. It was an inside joke that we would never, from our banker, that we would never get $450,000 for a front beach lot. And we did. And then I would say that, right after the Ryder Cup, a Frenchman, Pierre Lachalot, came in, and he bought 6 front beach lots. And I think the salesmen were surprised. We were delighted. And that really told the whole group that, the train's leaving the station, and, we were doing things right, and that that probably had more impact on sales at that time than anything else. And that was during the tumultuous time. One of the things that Landmark did for us is they had negotiated in Oak Tree in Oklahoma the PGA Championship for 1989. And part of that was the booby prize, if you will, was to take the Ryder Cup. And, we had never lost the Ryder Cup when they were awarded it. I think it was in '85. And then we lost in Muirfield in '87, and we tied in '89. So the Ryder Cup comes back here in '91, and golf is going, at the same time, golf's going up and to the right. And so, by all practical means, I mean, the war by the shore kind of made the Ryder Cup. It was the last putt, last group, high drama. And, so we were, that was the one thing that sort of catapulted us to the world stage. And then when this gentleman came and bought these lots, it sort of validated everything that we had done up until then. And keep in mind, we had a little interlude in September 21st of '89 when Hugo decided to come and visit.
So that is remarkable. And you're right. When I really don't have any memory of the Ryder Cup until the war by the shore. And I think that's true for a lot of people, that event created what we now understand the Ryder Cup to be in the modern conscience. And so this Frenchman, bought the 6 lots right after the Ryder Cup.
Right after the Ryder Cup.
Bought 6 lots. I'll be curious to know. I wonder if he still is around or has any of those properties. I can't imagine someone coming in today and buying 6 oceanfront lots. That would make a statement today, certainly. So Hugo, the Ryder Cup, and so the release of those oceanfront lots really, and selling them to Landmark, really kind of took some of the pressure off, the initial pressure on the financial part, I'm guessing.
Well, interest rates were 12.5%.
Okay.
And that translated to about $35,000 a day. So, we were sleeping with one eye open, trying to get the debt down,
right,
and as quickly as possible. And the average lot, I think, when we bought, was maybe $128,000. So you needed a lot of
to cover $35,000 a day.
Yeah,
just an interest, not to mention reducing principal. And so you guys went from there to the preserve. That was really the next big real estate release.
Yeah. We also did, the tax law that had changed, I think, in '87. So our version of multifamily was the Turtle Beach product that you see is still there today, which had the sort of Lowcountry wraparound porches, and it was like 4 units to the acre, but they were detached. And we did that, and we continued down a little sliver that, to quite honestly, we didn't even know we owned. When we bought Kiawah, what we bought was everything that was bordered by Captain Sands Inlet, the Stono Inlet, the Atlantic Ocean and Kiawah River, less what had been deeded out. That's what we bought. So there was no survey. There was just a big perimeter plat, and that was it. So there was land that we kept kind of finding that we didn't really know we owned, and that was part of it that runs along right there by Turtle Point now. And so we did that, and then we came and did Osprey Beach.
Okay. And the preserve, when I think about the preserve, I mean, what struck me and it's still today, it's got nature trails, it's got public waterfront, it's got a boat landing, a Cinder Creek clubhouse. I mean, it has a lot of thought, it seems, to the, preserving the character of Kiawah. And of course, it was a big project. That's a big parcel of land.
Well, there's probably 2 things that we never wavered from, and that one was the master plan. I think the master plan was done well before us, and it was done by some great minds over a good period of time. And we maybe altered it once or twice, but that was about it. And the other thing was the whole notion of designing with nature, which is some people kind of think that's trite sometimes, but that was a guiding principle of ours on our whole team, and we kept coming back to that. So the preserve was, our version of really reconnecting and doing that at that point in time. And, I think we did. And it was very successful, and it had great places for viewing, and the canoe, plus also to get out and actively go into the rivers and the estuaries. And it did that.
For sure. And I think that's the really first step in my mind, where you're creating the whole aesthetic of Kiawah that we understand today. That project, which leads me to the next chapter, which is the Kiawah Island Club. Because it was not long after that, to my understanding, that you designed and developed and the beach club. And what I think is remarkable about that is that your the first element of the club was not a golf amenity; it was a beach club. So I guess I wanted to ask you, Buddy, the Kiawah Island Club. What was there a model for that somewhere else that you guys saw, or was it something that you dreamed up on your own? And tell me about why you started with a beach club and not a golf club.
Well, you have to go back just a little bit back to Landmark. So Landmark did a lot of great things. They brought us the Ryder Cup, which, by the way, was going to be at PGA West. That's where it originally was. And because the Ryder Cup had grown in popularity so much and golf was becoming so popular, and still is probably more, the Ryder Cup's probably more popular across the pond and in the UK and Ireland and Europe, you can't have it. You got to get it beamed home before people go to sleep, midnight or so. So that made, having on the West Coast at PGA West and Palm Springs, you were 3 hours behind that. So that's why you'd never hardly see it go past the Midwest. Medina's as far west as you've seen it. So Landmark brought us that, but the bad news is after having all of what they brought to the table, RTC was clamping down on SNLs. They were an SNL, and so during the Ryder Cup, literally in their tent, they're concocting a plan to put themselves in bankruptcy in Charleston to try and ward off the RTC. And so what that did is everything was moving through the snake, as you will, it said that basically that we didn't know until those were resolved, we might be owning, Osprey again. And maybe Osprey would have been the natural course to turn into a private club. It had not been open. When we bought, it had never been played before. Now, the first thing we did was get tee hardware and, finish putting sand in the traps, and then we opened it. Labor Day, I think, of 88.
Okay.
So with things in flux, what we did is we said, okay, we're going to do the beach club first. And the Kuwaitis had gone out and semi-promised a club to all the property owners. So to extinguish that right, we went out to all the property owners, said, you can be a member of this club. It's only going to be a beach club at first, but if and when we do golf, you'll have the right to, be first in line to get to a golf club. So that's what we did. So Thanksgiving of 92, I believe, we opened the Robert A.M. Stern Beach Club, and it was absolutely stunning, beautiful for all 21 days that it existed. And then on December 21st, I get a call that said, the beach club is burned down. I said, well, I'll be there in just a second. And they said, don't come, no need to come. There was nothing there. It was a cold, windy, sleety night. Wind was blowing. It was like a hairdryer you'd put on a fire. It burned the kitchen equipment. It burned the marble. It burned everything. There was nothing but the stub of a few piles.
21 days.
21 days. So what did we do? We went back and we rebuilt it and opened it the next Thanksgiving.
So how many folks took you up on your offer to join of the Kiawah residents when you opened it to the whole island? 500 members. And what did it cost to join the beach club?
$5,000.
$5,000. Okay, and it's and choosing Robert A.M. Stern. I mean, that he was kind of out of the neighborhood. I mean, how did that? Because to me the look and the aesthetic of that building, the first and the second version, really set the tone for architecture around the island even today. And so I think that decision to select that architect is important. Tell us how that came to be.
Well, my cousin Leonard had dealt with a lot of architects. He'd done a lot of projects, renovating houses in and around Charleston. And, LS3P had really good architects, and we had used them. They built the sales center right when you come in. And
good looking place too.
And I think the consensus was that we were going to use them to do a beach club. And then Mark Pamar comes in one day to a meeting with a book, and it had pictures of this guy, Robert A.M. Stern, who I think none of us had ever really heard about. And we all said, wow, that looks great. And so we met with him. He's very charismatic. And we picked him. And, I think probably people ask me, it's probably one of the most singular things that we did that really impacted architecture and the view of architecture on the island, and the caliber of architects and that people chose after that. So it really was a catalyst, and looking back on it, maybe it was just a little bit of luck, but it did very well for us.
There's no question. I mean, it set the mark, I think, and you could argue that continued at the River Club. That aesthetic, that design, and really sense of excellence that I think those buildings, the statement that they made. The River Course, was that the same architect, or was that a different?
No, I mean, we started. We had partners early on, and those partners we replaced with Morgan Stanley, and there was a gentleman, Jim Alwyn, who came in one day and bought 2 front beach lots, and he built a house, and he used Shope Reno Wharton.
Okay. And
Morgan Stanley was our partner. We were the first deal and the first real estate fund that they had. So they, we interviewed Stern, we interviewed other people, and we interviewed, and Alan Shope was equally as charismatic, and so we used them, and it was, I think, a great decision. And the model for that was we sort of liked Shinnecock and the way it looked. And I'd say this is probably the only time in my career that the first thing that the architect gives you, we didn't really change. So the first rendering that he said, "Do you like this?" We said, "We love this," and that was that.
Right. That's very cool. And so the whole shingles and the eyebrows and all those elements you see in homes all through the island now from those two designs.
Yeah, so we did that, and Morgan Stanley, they said we need a budget, and we had a budget to do all of the river course, the course with Tom and the building. So we had a guy. I know we had a guy that in the living area. He went to Lowe's and got some yellow pine, and then he had box cutter and a sock full of nickels, and he distressed it, and then he put some golden, many coats of stain and varnish on it, and it looked really good. Somebody came in one day and took one of the shelves, and then they took a box cutter and went under the couch and took a piece of carpet. And if they'd have just asked us, we would have told them, subsequent to that, we did a little booklet that says, this is where you can get these things. This is where we bought this from. This is where we bought that from. But I'm like, these people are pretty well to do, and they're sitting there taking carpet samples.
Oh my gosh.
And little did they know that that was done on a pretty tight budget, but it turned out very well.
Absolutely. And this was, I guess, in 1995 is around
Correct.
when the river course shapes up, and of course that is an important neighborhood today and hugely successful. And this is selfishly, this is my favorite project that you did on Kiawah is the Cassique, and so that really followed next. And that building also is a singular design, very unique and gorgeous, and its architectural details are found now, I think, around certainly the Cassique and other parts of the island. Tell us about how that project came to be, maybe even the name Cassique, the design of the building, the Voysey design. I'm sure there's a story there.
Well, the Cassique land is technically, as most people know, not on Kiawah. And it was owned by a Saudi family. And I had become friendly with the American that represented the family. And they had bought everything at the height of the market and then watched it go down. So it came time that I thought that we could purchase it. So we did. And part of the agreement we had that dated back to Landmark was if we ever bought that property, we had to offer the other one half. So Bill Goodwin, who had subsequently bought the Landmark assets at auction, he had the rights to own 50% of it. So we divvied that up. He took the property across the street, and we took what is Cassique today. And, it was very flat. It was tomato fields. We came in with Tom Watson and moved 1 million yards of dirt, mostly on the front nine. And we immediately said that we wanted something that was like a country manor home that you would see in the English countryside. And so, you start peeling the onion and we get, this Voysey, which was a turn-of-the-century architect in England. And, Chope was Reno Wharton. We went back to them. There were actually 6 architects that worked on that project, all the way from Peter Bentel, who did a lot of the Voysey restaurant in there, to Stan Gibson. So there were a lot of people that worked on it. It had 27 grade changes. One of the things that we like to do is bring the building up so you're not going up a whole flight of stairs. We did that to the beach club. It's raked up almost 19 feet from sea level. So, it turned out great. It's, I think it's one of those things that's gotten a little bit better with time. And it really defined that neighborhood. And, the vernacular we tried to, which is now being reflected in all of the houses that are being built there. So, it all sort of kind of weaves together. But
now, Tom Watson, so how did that come about, that connection with him? And you and he became friends, I think is true.
Yeah, so I'd been going down to the Heritage every once in a while, and he loves Harbour Town as a golf course. And he was good friends with a gentleman who sold baby formula that was good friends with my dad, who's a pediatrician. And so we got to be friendly. And then, when it came time to pick an architect for Cassique, he'd never really done a golf course before. And we had in our management group was Charlie Arrington, who's as good as any designer out there. He just hadn't won 5 British Opens. So, So between the two of them, that's what birthed Cassique. You asked about the name. We went around the table and I asked everyone, what do you think the name ought to be? And, it was Carolina, the Meadows, all these. And I go like, how about Cassique? No, we don't like that. People are not going to pronounce it, right, on and on. So we went for the groundbreaking and we didn't have consensus. So I grabbed this old Cassique statue that was done by a famous artist, and it's in the Cassique Pro Shop, and I grabbed it, and I went. No one knew. I said, "Well, I'd like to, everybody to, please gather around and for the groundbreaking of Cassique," and raised it up, and of course, half of the management team rolled their eyes, and the other half. I think I had one proponent that thought that was a great name, but maybe it's gotten mispronounced a couple of times, but it certainly is something that's very distinctive, and it did have a history. He was the Cassique is the head of the Indians that used to trade along the shore, and so it had some local flavor and history to it.
No question, and the course, to me, it's my favorite course, and as I said, a clubhouse. But I'm curious, what is between those two golf courses? You're a golfer and a good one. What is your favorite test there, the river or Cassique?
Frank Ford, who's probably the one of the best golfers around in Charleston. He told me if he wanted to really know how well he was playing, he'd go play the river course. And I think the river course is a great test of golf. Plus, it's visually, it's stunning. And 12 on in is as good of finishing holes, I think, that you have. Cassique is a little bit different experience. From my perspective, I just wanted a golf course that if you didn't get on the tee sheet today for Cassique, you had no problem going to the river course and vice versa.
Nice. Now you mentioned a coin toss story somewhere in this era of the development. Is that tied into the Cassique, or is that?
So Freshfields was, came after we finished the development of Cassique. And like I said, we had owned this jointly with Bill Goodwin, and we'd been partners with Bill on the ocean course. And, in the early days, there was a little bit of push-pull because he was coming into our sandbox and he'd paid a lot of money and he was doing things, and, we had covenants and other things that regulated what he could do. And, so there was a little bit of, us getting used to each other. But so it came time that we owned this property together, Freshfields. And I go like, Bill and I are dear friends. We share the same birthday, a few years apart. And I said, Bill, we've had a history of like maybe not agreeing on everything. I said, if we don't agree on this piece of property and what we're going to do with it, let's don't be tethered. Do you have a problem if we just flip a coin? I said, I'm over you getting an appraiser and I get an appraiser and they pick an appraiser and then they go, he thought that was great. So the lawyers obviously had a lot of fun with it. And sure enough, a year goes by and we can't really agree on where the boundaries are. And so we moved to the coin flip. And it was February, and we were supposed to have it at like 12 o'clock. And I get a call about 11 that says, like, Buddy, I think we need to delay the coin flip. And it called for, going down to the bank and getting 4 quarters, getting 2 die. And basically it was right after the NFL had their little debacle on the coin flip. So we said, we'll adopt the NFL rules. We flip it up, let it hit the floor. So I don't think it called for my lawyer to flip the coin. I don't think he liked that. And I don't know if he thought that the dice were rigged, but so he sent his guy to Toys R Us to get a Yahtzee sip and to get fresh die. And our group went down and they got 4 quarters, and we got up, and what we were going to do is he rolled 1 die and I rolled a die. Whoever's the highest got to call it. And of course, I got everybody but a psychic in the room with me, and I knew I was heads I was going to call heads long time before we even got in the room. So he wins the dice, the dice toss, and so he calls tails, and the lawyer's son, whose birthday it was that day, they acquiesced and said he could flip it. So he flips it. It went up, hit the air-conditioned grill at the top on the ceiling, and then it rolled on its side for what seemed like, a day. And then it went heads. And so that was it. So, we won the land. I paid him his interest in the land, and then we went on to develop Freshfields.
That's incredible. So that's how you came to get that property and develop Freshfields. And Freshfields itself, you could argue, is another singular effort on your and your partner's part. It's a unique design. At the time, it was not conventional, and it has had a real influence, I think, on Kiawah, Seabrook, that whole neighborhood. The walkability of it, and the denser nature of it, and the aesthetic of it. I think it's unique.
Well, we knew that bad retail would impact our property values. People would have to ride past a strip center, if you will, and a good retail would add value. And so none of us, that was not really our forte. We'd never, as a group, none of us had really done retail. So we went, what did we do? We went and learned how to do it and how not to do it. And, went to Celebration, where a lot of, high-powered architects had done some work. Went to Worth Avenue and Palm Beach, to Meisner Park. Went up to the Northeast to look at some of the quaint little villages in Salem and Marblehead. And we came back, and that's, the amalgamation of all of those efforts. And we hired, I think, 7 architects, and we didn't want it to look Disney-esque. We wanted to look like it had been done over time, but we needed to do enough critical mass to make sense of it. So each architect had a building or 2 buildings, and what you see there is the fruits of all of that, and a lot of good people working on it, a lot of talented people, and proof's in the pudding. Now people are coming to study it, and like.
Yeah, no, it's an unqualified success, and I know you got to be proud of that as well. So, Buddy, one thing I wanted to ask you about also was Bill Goodwin. I mean, he's had, like you, an enormous influence on Kiawah. I'm curious how you came to meet him, how he entered the scene, on Kiawah. I mean, I'd love to hear more about that.
Well, first off, let me say that Bill and his family has been an incredible addition to Kiawah. And we waited a long time for a hotel and a good operator, and we found the best. He maintains his properties. He treats his people well, and we're lucky as an island to have him there. Bill, when Landmark Land finally the disposition of their assets were going to go to auction, it was at a huge, ballroom in Dallas, Texas. And when I say huge, it was huge. And we were partners at the time with Morgan Stanley. We had an excellent relationship through the Ryder Cup and other things that we had done with the PGA of America. So we were going to go and we were going to buy all of those assets. We were going to make Kiawah PGA East, and we were going to, own La Quinta and Palm Beach Polo, and Morgan Stanley was, going to fund this. And so it was a very convoluted, way that they did the auction. You went in first and bid on each asset, then you went and bid on the aggregate, and then you could come back one by one and trump that. And if it went above the aggregate, then they sold them off, piece by piece. So we get to the Kiawah is I think the fourth or fifth thing to be auctioned off. And I'd met Bill and his friend Buddy Armstrong once or twice before we got into this big space. And this is like a football field. And everybody's got phones, and, Morgan Stanley's being real coy. We had 6 tables, only one phone was really hooked up. And it cost, to get in the pit, cost $250,000 just to get in. And so the auctioneer starts auctioning off Kiawah. We raise our hand, and somebody in the back raises their hand. We raise our hand, someone in the back. So we're up 35 million, and we're getting close to what we think the assets are worth.
And what year is this? Remind me.
This was 94.
Okay.
And so, because I was the only one that had really met Bill and Buddy, the Jamal one goes do you know these guys? And I go well, I met them. Well, what do you think they're, where are they going to stop? Because we're bidding against each other on the same assets. I go, I don't know. How about if I go ask them? So it was like a 3 or 4 minute walk. I go, Bill, how high do you think you're going to go to, on these assets? I said, Buddy hasn't even sat down. He's got his paddle up in the air. And when we bid, he's back there. He hadn't even, he's still got it up. And he says, I don't know, maybe 60 million. So I said, hold tight. So I go back and I go I think he's going to go to 60 million. Well, we'll go back there and tell him we're not going to bid anymore and that he can have them. And that we look forward to working with him.
Oh my gosh.
And so that's what happened. He bought them. The aggregate was trumped and was not, it was trumped by the singular. So each asset was sold separately, and he ended up with those assets. And then, he at first wanted to maybe build a hotel at West Beach, and then gravitated towards East Beach and where the sanctuary is now. And he solicited our opinions, and he hired a really great architect out of Richmond. And I think, what you have is a beautiful, iconic hotel that is, been tremendously additive to the island. and as well as all of the improvements that he's done. He built Robert A.M. Stern clubhouse at the Ocean Course, and those cottages were by Stern. They're like 4 or 5
The new ones?
the new cottages that are there now. So here again, kind of goes back to 91 when we sort of set the example.
That A&A.
But it's nice to see him add on to that and some. So it's great. It's great to have him, and I think he would tell you if you ask him that his family, everything's off limits to be except Kiawah. Kiawah can't be sold. So I think his family will own it for hopefully generations.
So, Buddy, about 11 years ago, you and your partners exited Kiawah so that you could focus your energies and talents on a new project in the West Indies, St. Kitts. I'd love to hear a little bit more about that.
So we call it Christophe Harbour. It has a mega yacht marina, which we just concluded a sale to Safe Harbor in Blackstone. We built a Park Hyatt hotel, and we've had a beautiful beach club and a beach bar that Condé Nast voted one of the top 8 in the world. I'm not sure if that's true, but you take it. And we've got, home sites, and we've got probably 40 homes that are completed. It's a tremendous piece of property. Obviously, a little island like that, completely shut down during COVID. So it's been tough cranking back up. That we're in the process of, doing that and getting geared up for this coming season. So it's been good.
Yeah. Well, everything I've heard about it is gorgeous, and I can imagine how beautiful it is. We got to do our next part of our conversation down there. And I'm realizing I left something out which we didn't talk about before. Is it called Little Bear Island at the very end of Kiawah?
Yeah,
that's something that you and your partners put a permanent nature conservancy easement on. I'd like to ask you more about that. What year did you do that? What was the impetus? I mean, because now, frankly, there'd probably be a bridge going over there in homes, but you guys made a decision to do that. Tell us that story if you can.
Well, I think it was around 98, 99. We knew that we could, we could have built a bridge. We could have developed it. It's basically the continuation of what's now Ocean Park. But it would have been, early on we decided that we were not going to put houses on maybe a third of the Ocean Course. We wanted the Ocean Course to be, the best course that it could possibly be, and we thought houses were going to maybe be a detriment to, and not as good as you'd see. We wanted to be the same as some of the great links courses that you see that don't have homes. So to put at the end, and you would see them from the Ocean Course, the houses. So, we worked with a guy in Boston, and he was sort of the guru at the time, and we gave, a huge easement. In fact, at the closing table, I said, Steve, his name is Steve Small. I said, Steve, where does this compare, in terms of easements? And, and he said, Buddy, I think this is the largest monetary easement that's ever been done. And I go, oh, yeah.
In South Carolina?
No,
or
in the country.
Okay.
And I go, well, Ted Turner had bought the whole state of Idaho, I thought. And, but, it was, I think it was $47 million that, that it was the total of the easement. That doesn't accrue to us, but that was the value of what we were giving up back then.
Yeah, back then. That's remarkable. I think about that a lot when it's an important piece of property, and I happened to be there the day that you signed the easement. I remember that, and I remember thinking even then, this is big, and I wanted you to comment on it. I think that's remarkable, and I think it speaks to how you and your partners approached the whole of Kiawah. It was really with a legacy mindset, and to do something enduring, and as you said about Voysey, it just keeps getting better. I mean, and I think in a lot of ways that's true.
One of the things that when we got clarity, and we knew that Bill Goodwin was going to own what we call the resort assets, then it was easy for us to make the decision to go to what was called Bass Pond and do the river course. And I remember taking Tom Fazio out for the first time, and I said, Tom, here's Bass Pond, and that you can have the whole edges for the golf course. And he looked at me like, really? And I go, yeah. And I think the same principle sort of applied that, we didn't want to have houses populated when you drove in, especially, so that you felt like the other people that didn't live at the settlement were driving through someone else's neighborhood. So when you go around 7, 8, 9, those were all home sites, and who knows? I mean, it might have been a few extra shekels, but I think that value transferred, just like we want to think that the ocean course value transferred to everyone's property in terms of by not having those houses being right there.
No question. I mean, when I think about driving into the river course, if I try to imagine Bass Pond being surrounded by homes, which frankly most developers would have done that, it totally changes my mind's eye of what that entire feeling is when you enter that property. So I think that's remarkable. So tons of interesting things, and I wonder when you think about Kiawah now, and the time you're 30 years old, okay, and you find yourself leading the ownership group of this project, and now when you look at Kiawah and how it's turned out and developed, I'm curious, what is the most personal part to you? What feels the most personal when you visit Kiawah, when you're thinking about it? How would you respond to that?
I think the thing that gives me personally the most gratitude is when people come up and thank me, and that tangentially is thanking everybody on my team for making it such a special place and for touching that many people. I was just down in our project in St. Kitts, and someone I didn't even know said, look, I used to go to Kiawah when I was young, and what a special place it is, what a great memories we had. And those are things, as they say, is priceless, right? And, I mean, we can build all the buildings, and we had a tremendous staff, and through the club we were able to create a lifestyle, and I think that's endured, and I hope it endures for a long time.
Well, I think that's a given. I think the groundwork and the imprint you made is going to be permanent, and that's to your and your team's credit. Do you have any as we wrap up any hope or thoughts to the future of Kiawah, or any advice you would give folks that in leadership there as it relates to their stewardship and contribution to the island going forward?
No, I mean, I think I never did pay attention to the people in the background that are always they seem to be not happy wherever they go. But you need to be positive, and because there's tons more positive than negative at Kiawah, and you just have to listen, and you try to do your best. Things change over time. You have to change with it. I can remember our first property owner, the meeting that we had right after we bought. It was packed, and we had a standing ovation. And I can remember the last one that I went to, there were maybe 12 people there, which told me people were content. I haven't been to an annual meeting in a long time. I hope there's still just 12 people there.
Nice. Awesome. Well, Buddy, can't thank you enough for joining me today and continuing this story where we're discovering and learning about Kiawah and how it came to be that it was purposeful and thoughtful. It wasn't accidental how Kiawah came to be. Thank you for your family and your team's leadership and efforts there, and for spending time with me today.
Thank you.